The ambient glow of Neo Mumbai's neon-drenched cityscape did little to soothe Rohan Sharma's anxiety. He fiddled with the cuff of his best and only dress shirt, a pale blue cotton disaster he'd bought specifically for this evening. Just remember the protocol, Terran 47B, his dating app, which was actually a high-level galactic peace coordinator AI, pinged in his ear. The voice was smooth, automated, and utterly devoid of empathy. Maintain neutrality. Present Terran culture in its most favorable, non-threatening light. And for the love of the Soul Treaty, do not discuss politics or xenobiology. Rohan took a deep, shaky breath, the humid night air smelling of synthetic spice and ionized ozone. Got it, see. Neutrality. Favorable light. No talking about the giant crimson wings currently casting a shadow on the rooftop across the street. He was sitting at a small, slightly greasy chrome table outside the bite-sized bistro, a trendy, deliberately retro spot that served authentic pre-expansion Earth food, mostly fried items and overly cheesy pasta. It was the perfect place for a neutral, cultural exchange. His date Vikra was late. Which, considering she was a highly decorated, genetically enhanced Draconian war general's daughter, a species humanity had just barely avoided extinction against a decade ago, was probably a good thing. More time to sweat. A sudden sharp drop in the local air temperature and a collective intake of breath from the sparse street crowd announced her arrival. Rohan looked up. The thumbnail, the highly edited digitized file he'd been sent by the Interstellar Marriage Bureau, had not done her justice. She didn't walk, she glided. Her armor, a sleek, obsidian ensemble woven with shimmering deep blue light, was less a uniform and more a second skin, highlighting a physique honed by generations of combat and selective breeding. The horns, subtle and curved like dark polished jade, emerged from her hairline. Her eyes, which scanned the street with predatory precision, were a terrifying, mesmerizing crimson. And the wings, retractable, blood-red membranes, were currently tucked neatly beneath the shoulder pauldrons of her armor, hinting at the devastating power they contained. Vikra stopped directly in front of his table, the sheer force of her presence making the plastic cutlery rattle. Terran. You are Rohan Sharma? Her voice was a low, resonant purr, perfectly modulated, yet sharp enough to cut through the street noise. Yeah, that's me. Just Rohan is fine. Please have a seat. Rohan managed to keep his hand from shaking as he gestured to the empty chair. He remembered the protocol. Always maintain a welcoming, non-submissive posture. He smiled, maybe a little too widely. Vikra lowered herself onto the chair as if it were a booby-trapped device, her movements economical and supremely cautious. Her eyes locked onto the table, specifically the remnants of a previous patron's meal, a few grease stains and crumpled napkin. This arrangement. It is a mandatory requirement under the Sol Draconian Peace Accords, she stated, bypassing any pleasantries. I am here to fulfill my duty as a Warbride, a gesture of unification. I'm not here for pleasure. Right. Got that memo, Rohan chuckled nervously. But hey, duty or not, a first date is a first date. I took the liberty of ordering. I hope you like pepperoni and Saint cheese? Vikra's crimson eyes lifted slowly, fixing him with a stare that felt like being catalogued for immediate dismemberment. I am a Warbride Terran. My species feeds on high-density plasma and biofermented blood substitutes. I do not like whatever this starch and dairy paste is. Rohan's cheerful facade cracked slightly. Oh, right. My bad. We don't exactly stock plasma at the bistro. But hey, it's a Terran cultural staple. We call it a pizza. I thought it might be neutral. Neutrality is a concept for diplomats, Terran. Not for generals. We deal in fact. She waved a dismissive hand over the table. This whole environment is chaotic. Loud. And this food is clearly a health hazard. A young, slightly frazzled waiter, a college kid named Leo, arrived with Rohan's order. A large, bubbling pizza, aromatic with spice and melting cheese, was placed between them. Rohan took the opportunity to redirect. Okay, look. Forget the food for a second. Let's just talk. The treaty says we have to learn about each other's culture, right? So what's your favorite hobby? When you're not, commanding fleets and stuff. Vikra's lips, a surprisingly soft shade of plum, curled into a look of profound disbelief. My hobby is warfare strategy and tactical deployment, Terran. It is not a casual pastime. It is a necessary intellectual exercise. Rohan picked up a slice of pizza, stretching the cheese with a practiced wrist flick. Okay. Strategy. Cool. Me. I'm a systems analyst for the municipal power grid. My hobby is restoring old, pre-collapse video games. We both analyze complex systems. See. Common ground. He took a bite of the pizza, trying to appear relaxed. The warmth, the comforting saltiness, was a familiar anchor in this surreal moment. Vikra watched him chew. The raw, unadulterated act of Terran consumption seemed to genuinely disturb her. Your comparison is illogical. My system analysis determines the fate of billions of sentient beings. Yours determines if the traffic lights function optimally. There is no commonality. Except maybe the pressure? Rohan countered gently, putting the pizza down. If my grid goes down, half the city goes dark and people get mad. Trust me, mass public dissatisfaction is a pressure cooker. Just on a much smaller scale. Vikra leaned forward suddenly, her crimson gaze intensifying, the move so abrupt Rohan almost fell back. This was the moment captured in the thumbnail, the serious, heavy conversation that went wrong. I am going to state a fact, Terran Rohan Sharma. You were chosen for this treaty not for your tactical insight or genetic superiority, but for your mediocrity. Her voice dropped to a conspiratorial whisper, meant only for him. The Draconian High Command believes that by observing you, the average Terran, I will prove that your species is too weak, too emotional, and too utterly inconsequential to pose a long-term threat. They believe this marriage will dissolve, proving the treaty pointless. I am here to confirm their findings. She finished, her eyes radiating a cold, dark satisfaction. She had laid her cards on the table, the ugly, political reality of their date. The atmosphere around their little chrome table turned instantly toxic. The scattered remnants of food and the overturned beer bottle on the table suddenly seemed to be the physical manifestation of her declaration. Rohan didn't blink. He didn't flinch. He just looked at the beautiful, deadly Warbride across from him. Then an impossible thing happened. A tiny, slow, utterly Terran smile spread across his face. Wow, Rohan said, reaching for a napkin to wipe his chin. That is genuinely depressing. Look, I'm not saying your high command is wrong about me being average. They're probably right. I just fix power grids, remember? But here's my fact, General Vikra. He paused, his voice calm, steady, and utterly human. We're having a first date. It's mandatory. It's awkward. You hate the food, you hate the setting, and you've just openly stated your mission is to invalidate my species. But you know what you did not do. He looked at the mess on the table, the discarded napkin, the messy remains of the appetizer. You haven't left. You're still sitting here. Which means, despite your general's orders and despite your obvious disgust, there is a tiny, infinitesimal part of you that is either curious or following the protocol to an irritating degree. He pushed the pizza box slightly closer to her. So, for the sake of the protocol and maybe just a little bit for the sake of your own curiosity, would you at least try a tiny piece of the pizza? Vikra stared at the slice, then back at Rohan. The red in her eyes seemed to flicker. Her entire posture was confusion mixed with rage. The human wasn't fighting back with power. He was fighting back with patience. This Terran date had gone horribly wrong, yes. But for Vikra, the horror wasn't the food or the setting. It was the terrifying realization that she couldn't understand the enemy sitting right across from her. And that, in the rigid structure of her war hobby mind, was the greatest tactical failure of all. Vikra's internal tactical processor, a complex, neurosynaptic network that had successfully navigated 3 interstellar conflicts, was currently running a high-priority diagnostic on the Terran male. Rohan Sharma. Threat level, low physical. Predictability, non-existent, emotional. Protocol compliance, questionable, defiant. He had just committed an act of blatant psychological insubordination. He had taken her official politically loaded declaration of intent, that she was there to prove his species weak, and calmly reframed it as a simple, social failing. He had minimized the gravity of her purpose with the triviality of a pizza crust. Your assessment is flawed, Terran, Vikra stated, her voice tight, the smooth modulation slipping a fraction to reveal a brittle edge of genuine annoyance. I'm not sitting here out of mere curiosity. I am sitting here because my ship's transportation beacon is scheduled for extraction at 0100 hours, and leaving prematurely would incur a minor, yet undesirable, penalty point on my diplomatic record. Ah, a bureaucratic thing, Rohan nodded knowingly, completely unfazed. He gently nudged the pizza box again. We have those too. Very annoying. So, purely for the sake of avoiding that penalty point and maybe keeping your diplomatic score high, just try the pizza. Think of it as a cultural data packet you need to process. He was treating her like an intern who couldn't figure out a spreadsheet. It was an insult her species would typically answer with vaporization. Yet here, under the blinding, vulgar neon of Neo Mumbai, the protocol demanded she maintain her composure. Vikra's hand, encased in its armored gauntlet, twitched toward the slice of food. It was an involuntary reaction, a tactical misstep. The grease, the strange smell of cooked tomato and fermented milk, repulsed her, Yet the sheer insistence of the Terran's calm gaze forced her to reconsider. Hypothesis. The Terran is attempting to poison me. Counter-hypothesis. The Terran smiles too genuinely to be a competent assassin. Action. Observe, do not consume. The chemical composition of this pizza is highly unstable, Vikra informed him, her eyes tracing the greasy sheen on the cheese. It is a known high-risk factor for Terran cardiovascular failure. Why would you offer a substance that is chemically detrimental to your own species? Rohan sighed, the sound oddly weary, not exasperated. He picked up the bottle of beer he had ordered, the one that Vikra's earlier emotional outburst had knocked slightly ajar, and poured a small amount into his glass. Because, Vikra, we also live for things that are bad for us. We love fast cars, high-sugar desserts, and dating people who are probably going to kill us, he said, taking a deliberate sip of the bitter liquid. It's not about logic, it's about flavor and feeling. It's the whole point of Terran culture, to find pleasure and meaning in the illogical. And right now, the logic is that the treaty demands we complete this date. He gestured to the surrounding cafe. The crowd, having briefly paused their lives for the terrifying entrance of the Warbride, had mostly gone back to their own chaotic, illogical lives, laughing, arguing, and spilling drinks. Look around you. This is humanity. We survive the impossible not by being the strongest but by being the most stubbornly average. Your mission to confirm our weakness, it's going to fail. Not because we're secretly powerful but because we're secretly okay with being messy. He pointed to the scattered remnants of food on the table, the very image captured in the thumbnail. See? A mess. That's us. Vikra followed his gaze to the table. The sight of the spilled sauce and the overturned fork irritated her highly organized draconian sensibilities. She raised a hand, a flicker of deep blue energy crackling over her gauntlet. Do not expect me to tolerate this filth, she commanded, and a small, localized gravitational vortex snapped into existence around the table. With a microscopic, precise pull, all the debris, the spilled sauce, the crumbs, the bent fork, was instantly sucked up and atomized into nothingness. The table was instantly spotless. The change was unnerving. Rohan's jaw actually dropped. Okay. That is not average. That's a highly advanced, localized cleanup field. You just vaporized our mess. It is efficient, Vikra stated, her crimson eyes holding his. And now that the environment is neutralized, we can continue the discussion in a manner that adheres to galactic standards of order. Rohan stared at the now pristine tabletop, then at the Warbride. He started to laugh. It wasn't a nervous laugh, it was a genuine, full-throated Terran laugh, a sound Vikra hadn't processed in any of the diplomatic data packets. This is why your mission is going to fail, Vikra, Rohan managed between gasps of amusement. You take our mess and you vaporize it. But you can't vaporize the reason we made the mess. We were being clumsy. We were talking. We were having an emotional reaction. That's what's dangerous about us. We clean up, but we don't learn the lesson of cleanliness, we just learn how to make a bigger mess next time. Vikra's head tilted, a motion of confusion. The logic is unsound. Why would a species intentionally maintain destructive habits? Because the habit makes us feel something, Rohan countered. He picked up his empty glass. Look, the protocol says we complete the date. We've established that I'm average, you're an assassin, and we both hate the diplomatic requirements. So, let's do the final Terran ritual of a bad date. He stood up, offering his hand over the table. Vikra stared at his extended hand, pale, unarmored, vulnerable. It was an invitation, a gesture of peace and utter, ridiculous trust. What is this ritual? She demanded, her gaze narrowing. We shake hands and we pretend it was better than it was, Rohan said, the smile finally fading to something earnest. We both walk away knowing we did our jobs and we schedule the next one. Protocol complete. A long moment of silence hung between them, heavy with the weight of treaties and expectations. Vikra could take his hand and crush the fragile Terran bones. She could activate the energy shield and demand a full debriefing right now. But something held her back, the illogical sincerity in his eyes. Conclusion. The Terran is a variable that cannot be solved by current draconian tactics. New action. Observe the Terran variable in its natural environment. Vikra slowly, deliberately, extended her own hand. She did not remove her armored gauntlet. The cold, smooth metal of her hand met the warm, soft skin of his. It was a terrifying contrast, weapon meeting flesh. The next meeting will not be in this public, disorderly environment, Vikra stated, the pressure of her grip exactly, and unervingly, controlled. It will be on my terms. I require a controlled, strategic environment to complete my assessment. Rohan squeezed her gauntlet gently. Sounds like a plan. Just try to keep the planet in one piece until then. And Vikra? What, Terran? Don't vaporize the next restaurant. It's bad for business. Vikra snatched her hand back, the flicker of annoyance returning. With a sharp, sudden motion, she turned and glided back through the crowd, vanishing into a flash of red light and synthesized ozone as her extraction beacon pulled her away. Rohan stood there for a long time, looking at his tingling, slightly sweaty hand. The coordinator AI, Z, chirped in his ear. Protocol, complete. Assessment. Initial contact yielded results within expected parameters for a high-value draconian asset. You're safe. You may now return home, Terran 47B. Rohan sank back into his chair, rubbing his forehead. He looked at the perfectly clean table where he had just sat with a woman who could end his civilization with a nod. Z, Rohan whispered, picking up the last cold slice of pizza. That wasn't within expected parameters. That date went horribly wrong. And I think I just scheduled a second one. The Draconian diplomatic shuttle, the vigilance of logic, was a marvel of silent power, its dark hull barely visible against the light pollution of Earth's atmosphere. Inside the sterile confines of her private quarters, General Vikra sat at a polished chrome table, the silence broken only by the hum of the ship's gravitic stabilizers. She was no longer in her combat armor. She wore a simple obsidian tunic that emphasized her height and the intricate network of discipline that defined her species. Her horns, now slightly retracted due to the low-gravity environment of the shuttle, felt dull against her scalp. Vikra stared at the three-dimensional, glowing projection of Rohan Sharma's psychological profile. The file was color-coded, mostly a bland, unassuming beige, a color her species used to denote low priority and tactical insignificance. Review the primary objective of the assessment, Z, Vikra commanded, her voice reverting to its icy, general-level precision. The ubiquitous AI coordinator, which had spoken to Rohan with automated diplomacy, answered Vikra with stark, ruthless efficiency. Objective: to determine if Terran 47B Rohan Sharma possesses any latent or hidden capability that would render his species a long-term strategic threat to the Draconian Dominion. Hypothesis: negative. Expected outcome: proof of Terran mediocrity and political invalidation of the Soul Treaty. Vikra tapped the holographic image of Rohan's smiling, completely unconcerned face. His response to my direct declaration of intent was not aggression, but patience. His response to the threat of his cultural staple was amusement. His counter-tactic was to offer me a slice of chemically unstable starch paste. This does not compute with the expected psychological profile of a species that nearly defeated us in the Third Contact War. The Terran's behavior is consistent with the data on the average Terran reaction, Z calmly reported. It is a defense mechanism rooted in their species' tendency toward hope and emotional deflection. He is attempting to neutralize your hostile intent by treating it as a common social awkwardness. Vikra leaned back, the metal seat cool against her skin. I was expecting a warrior or at least a fearful supplicant. I was instead presented with a gardener of obsolete electrical systems who laughs at existential threats. The disaster of the first date was not the failure of the protocol, but the failure of my own expectations. She looked at the image of the clean table she had created with the localized gravity field. She had scrubbed the surface clean, but she hadn't erased the underlying mess of the human interaction. My next approach must be strategic, Vikra decided. I will remove the variables of public setting and shared culture. The next assessment will take place on my ground, using a purely draconian cultural exercise designed to reveal psychological weakness through intellectual stress. Vikra brought up a schematic of Rohan's identified residence. A small, cluttered apartment in the aging residential sector of Neo Mumbai. It was filled with dusty, pre-collapse artifacts, mostly archaic gaming consoles and vinyl records. Prepare an invitation, Vikra ordered. The second assessment will be a demonstration of draconian intellectual combat. We will play the game of worlds in his Terran dwelling. This requires total focus, rapid calculation, and the ruthless elimination of suboptimal strategies. His failure will be swift, undeniable, and provide the objective proof I need. Vikra spent the next 6 cycles reviewing every known Terran strategy guide, not for the Game of Worlds, but for the outdated, primitive Terran games Rohan played. She found patterns of cooperation over competition, emotional attachments to non-essential assets, and a bizarre fascination with random chance. It was all so inefficient. The following evening, the vigilance of logic hovered silently over Rohan's apartment block. The chime of Rohan's front door was accompanied by a synthesized, low growl. Rohan opened the door, finding Vikra standing in the hallway, looking even more formidable than before. She was back in her combat leathers, her red eyes burning in the dim light. General Vikra, Rohan said, smiling genuinely. He was wearing a soft, threadbare university sweatshirt and holding a mug of what smelled like Terran coffee. Right on time. Come in. Sorry about the mess. He gestured into the apartment, which was a controlled chaos of books, cables, and old hardware. Vikra stepped inside, her highly trained senses immediately assaulted. The low, warm light. The smell of burnt toast and ancient paper. And the sound, a repetitive, cheerful, synthetic melody coming from an old arcade cabinet in the corner. The environment is suboptimal for strategic thought, Vikra stated, her voice tight. The clutter is a reflection of a disorderly mind. It's cozy, Rohan countered, perfectly calm. He took a sip of his coffee. But I take your point. You wanted to meet on your terms. So what's the agenda? Are we going to try an alien form of bowling? Or are we just going to sit here and stare at each other until one of us blinks? Vikra moved to the center of the room. A soft, blue light emanated from her hand, and a small, complex holographic device materialized on his coffee table. It projected an intricate, three-dimensional map of a distant, star-strewn cluster. We are going to play the game of worlds, Vikra announced, her voice firm. It is a pure strategy exercise. 2 players, 2 empires, vying for galactic domination. No chance. Only skill, prediction, and the destruction of the opposing force. I will not be using my full tactical capacity. I will restrict myself to the novice programming module. Your mission is to hold your position for 50 cycles. If you fail, the assessment is complete, and your species is deemed non-viable for any further draconian consideration. Rohan peered at the glowing map, his eyes wide. It looked like an unbelievably complex version of chess, played across 3 dimensions and a million variables. Galactic domination? 50 cycles. Rohan whistled. That's a big jump from pizza. But okay. I'll give it a shot. He sat down on his worn sofa. Vikra sat opposite him, her perfect posture a sharp contrast to his relaxed slouch. The air filled with the quiet tension of imminent conflict. Before we begin, Rohan said, taking another sip of coffee, I have one question. If this is a purely strategic game, why did you bring it to my apartment instead of playing it on your ship? Vikra's crimson eyes narrowed. I told you. I need to observe the Terran variable in its natural environment. Right? Rohan nodded slowly, a small, knowing glint entering his eye. He reached behind the sofa and pulled out 2 slightly dented rectangular controllers attached by a long, tangled cord. In that case, General Vikra, Rohan said, pushing one of the controllers into her hand. Before you try to defeat me in your game, you need to understand the logic of mine. He pressed the start button on the old arcade cabinet. The screen blazed to life, displaying 2 pixelated, cartoonish fighters standing ready. We're going to play a round of Cosmic Fist first, Rohan announced cheerfully. Because on Terran soil, the first date may be mandatory, but the first game is always ours. Vikra stared down at the clumsy plastic controller in her gauntlet, then up at the 2 blocky fighters on the screen, and the complex, cold logic of draconian warfare momentarily collapsed into bewildered silence. She, a decorated general's daughter, was being challenged to a game of button mashing on a relic of a primitive empire. The assessment had gone off protocol before it even began. Vikra's grip on the Terran controller was stiff, almost reverent, as if it were a fragile yet possibly explosive device. The plastic felt cheap and warm beneath her gauntlet. She looked from the controller to the screen where the 2 pixelated fighters, one red, one blue, bounced in a perpetual waiting loop. Explain the operational parameters of this Cosmic Fist, Vikra demanded, her crimson eyes narrowed in sharp analysis. Rohan leaned back on the sofa, seemingly utterly relaxed by the gravity of the situation. Galactic treaty implications forgotten in favor of button mashing. Okay, simple. You control the blue guy. I control the red one. The objective is to deplete the opponent's health bar to 0 by using a series of attacks. We call that KO or knockout. Best 2 out of 3. What is the strategic foundation? Vikra pressed. Is it turn-based? Does it employ a dynamic probability engine? What is the resource management component? Rohan chuckled, a light, easy sound. It has no strategy, Vikra. It has no resources. It's just timing and aggression. That big button on the right is your punch. The one below it is kick. The sequence of the directional pad combined with an attack button triggers a special move, a completely overpowered, flashy attack. Vikra's mind immediately began running simulations. Attack. A swift, focused kinetic strike. Special move. An expenditure of energy for maximum damage. The logic was crude yet effective. This is primitive but understandable. It relies on the psychological advantage of rapid reaction time and calculated energy expenditure, Vikra stated, a hint of disdain in her voice. I will allocate 30 cycles to observation, 3 cycles to analysis, and then execute the attack. Yeah, don't do that, Rohan advised. Just hit the buttons until the other guy stops moving. Ready? Fight. The synthesized voice of the game screamed, fight, and the round began. Vikra, adhering to her analysis, kept her blue fighter absolutely still. She watched as Rohan's red fighter danced around the screen, executing a series of dizzying random kicks and punches. Observation Cycle 1. The Terran's attack patterns are erratic. No discernible flow. No reliance on the environment. Pure, chaotic action. Observation Cycle 10. The Terran has depleted 10% of my health. This is inefficient but persistent. Vikra, you have to move. Rohan yelled, his tone a mix of coaching and genuine panic for his opponent. I am analyzing the hitbox collision vectors, Vikra retorted. Your approach is emotionally driven, Terran. I will wait for a tactical opening. Before she could finish the thought, Rohan, with a sudden, clumsy flourish, executed a special move. His fighter launched across the screen in a fiery, spinning blur, delivering a massive pixelated blow. KO. The screen flashed the word perfect. Rohan's health bar was untouched. Vikra's fighter lay inert on the ground. Vikra stared at the screen, her crimson eyes wide with cold fury. Impossible. My tactical analysis was sound. The Terran's move was statistically the least likely to connect with optimal force at that range. That's the beauty of the fireball kick, Vikra, Rohan said, beaming, utterly unconcerned that he had just humiliated a war general. It doesn't make sense. It's just fun to watch. And sometimes the most illogical move is the one the enemy doesn't see coming. 1-0 my score. Vikra's armor-clad hand tightened on the controller. Her logical mind was screaming for a complete system reboot. Her failure was public, and it was due to a primitive game engine that clearly violated all known laws of strategic balance. Run a rapid analysis of the fireball kick input sequence. Vikra commanded the unseen Z, who silently complied. Round 2. This time Vikra moved. She pressed the directional pad with careful, deliberate precision, causing her blue fighter to move forward in short, measured steps. She attempted to mimic a textbook draconian martial arts sequence. A quick jab, a block, a low sweep. Rohan, meanwhile, was mashing buttons with the relaxed rhythm of someone stirring soup. He was making noise, yelling encouragement to his pixelated avatar, and generally behaving with complete, uncouth spontaneity. Vikra saw an opening, a 3-frame window where Rohan's fighter was exposed after an unnecessary jump. She went for the precise, high-damage strike. Punch. Rohan was already pressing a random sequence of buttons. His fighter stumbled, missed Vikra's perfectly timed punch, and accidentally executed a super-ultra special move, a devastating, screen-clearing blast that took out 70% of Vikra's health bar in one go. KO. The screen flashed, flawless victory. Rohan erupted in cheers, throwing his arms up. Yes. You gotta love the wobble fist of destiny. 2-0. Good game, Vikra. You should have seen your face. Vikra slowly placed the controller back on the table. Her breathing was shallow. She was not angry, she was experiencing the cold shock of a general who had just lost a major orbital battle to a species using paper airplanes. This game, Vikra said, her voice dangerously low. It does not reward strategy. It rewards randomized input and noise. It rewards heart, Rohan corrected gently, his celebratory excitement fading as he saw the genuine confusion in her eyes. It rewards the willingness to lose beautifully. And honestly, it rewards getting lucky. And luck is a huge part of human success. We embrace the chaos, Vikra. We don't try to control every variable. Vikra looked away from the screen, her gaze fixing on the cluttered shelf holding Rohan's collection of antique gaming cartridges. Your entire society is built on embracing disorder, she summarized, a realization dawning in her eyes that was far more disturbing than any physical threat. You do not seek perfect predictability, you seek enjoyable chaos. This is why our data on Terran weakness is flawed. We were looking for tactical weakness. We missed the cultural strength. She stood up abruptly, her shadow looming over Rohan. The game of worlds lay forgotten on the table. The first 2 assessments are invalid, Vikra declared. The date was contaminated by public spectacle. This exercise was contaminated by illogical game parameters. My superiors demand tangible proof of your mediocrity, Terran. I will now create an assessment that is purely based on Terran domesticity, an environment where your species' emotional frailty will be impossible to conceal. Rohan stood up as well, meeting her gaze. His slight smile was back. Bring it on, General. But just so you know, our domesticity is basically 90% bad decisions and 10% pure, unadulterated comfort. It might be harder to break than you think. Vikra ignored him. She looked down at the coffee table where the Game of Worlds console lay. She reached out with her gauntlet, but instead of crushing it, she paused. Then, with a fluid, precise motion, she unplugged the blue controller cable from the console and tucked it inside her tunic's inner pocket. I require the input sequence for the Wobble Fist of Destiny, Vikra stated, her eyes burning with newfound strategic interest. And I require a demonstration of the next Terran custom you call doing laundry. Be prepared, Terran. This is not a game. With that, she turned, walking to the door with the same imposing grace she had arrived with, leaving Rohan alone in his messy apartment, clutching his half-empty coffee mug and a very strong feeling that the treaty was officially the least of his problems. The next assessment took place the following day, precisely at 0900 hours, which Vikra had calculated as the optimal pre-noon window for Terran domestic energy consumption. She arrived wearing a sleek, flexible training suit, ready for action, though this particular action involved detergents and fabric softeners. Rohan, who had been enjoying a leisurely third cup of coffee while reviewing system logs, simply sighed. Welcome back, General. You're missing the neon signage and the existential threats, but the coffee machine is over there. Are we strategizing breakfast this morning, or is it straight into the trenches of chore warfare? Vikra ignored the offer of coffee. She stood before Rohan's laundry hamper, a woven plastic basket overflowing with clothes. To Vikra, the contents represented a chaotic, unsorted logistical nightmare. This is the laundry? Vikra demanded, her voice echoing with disbelief. A random aggregation of highly variable organic fibers, contaminated with numerous bioresidues and pigments. It is a microbiological hazard. It's a hamper, Vikra. It's where the dirty clothes go, Rohan explained, gesturing to the pile. The objective is to make them clean. And believe me, cleaning them is a strategic masterpiece. Vikra brought up a retinal display that projected a detailed, color-coded scan of the contents. The primary tactical failure here is the sorting process. Why are light and dark pigments mixed? The risk of color degradation is 98.7% if washed simultaneously. This is a deliberate act of material sabotage. It's called doing a mixed load, Vikra. It saves time and water, Rohan said, walking over to the washing machine, an ancient, rumbling white appliance in the corner. See, the Terran philosophy is, good enough is usually enough. Vikra took a step back, holding up a warning hand. Stop. We must establish the tactical order of operations. Phase 1, segregation. This pile must be divided into 3 vectors: whites, high-risk contaminant; darks, pigment leakage; and delicates, structural integrity failure. She began to methodically pluck items from the hamper. Her movements were swift, her gaze unblinking. She sorted a week's worth of Rohan's life, his worn gray sweatshirt, his bright blue work uniform, his ancient, holy socks, into neat, scientifically ordered piles on the floor. This sweatshirt, Vikra said, holding up the threadbare university garment he wore the night before. It has an intrinsic emotional signature, yet its tensile strength is below optimal. It should be retired. Why maintain a weakening asset? Rohan shrugged. Because it's comfortable. It smells like my apartment. It reminds me of the good old days when finals week was the scariest thing in my life. It's called attachment, Vikra. It has 0 tactical value, but maximum emotional value. We keep things because we like them, not because they're efficient. Vikra placed the sweatshirt precisely into the delicates pile. Illogical. Attachment is a distraction. A general must be willing to sacrifice any asset for the greater strategic outcome. Well, you just found the perfect Terran counter-strategy, making us attached to our assets so we won't sacrifice them, Rohan grinned. Vikra continued sorting, but her analysis hit a snag. She held up 2 socks, one gray, one blue, both clean, both unmatched. Explain this anomaly, she commanded. These are components of a single system. Why are they not mated? Data suggests that for every cycle of Terran laundry, 1.2% of components are lost without a trace. Where do they go? Is this a covert Terran technology test, designed to create a sense of low-grade anxiety in the population? No, Vikra, that's the sock goblin, Rohan deadpanned. It's a domestic phenomenon. Nobody knows where they go. They just disappear. It's part of the chaos. Vikra pinched the bridge of her nose. A chaotic system is acceptable, but a willfully illogical and unexplained one is intolerable. If you cannot account for 1.2% of your population's textiles, what hope do you have of accounting for a draconian fleet? Rohan stepped in. Look, forget the sock goblin. You've sorted everything. That's more effort than I put in all year. Now we load the whites into the machine. As Rohan started to measure the brightly colored detergent, Vikra's eyes widened. "Stop!" she yelled, the force of the command making the washing machine vibrate. "That liquid. It is a complex mixture of chemicals designed to strip contaminants. If used incorrectly, it will destroy the fiber integrity. I recommend a localized plasma cleanse, a far more efficient, high-energy solution." "A plasma cleanse on my underwear?" Rohan raised an eyebrow. "Vikra, the objective is to make them clean, not make them glow in the dark. Plus, plasma on my delicate sweatshirt will turn it into a tiny pile of ash. Which, I guess, does solve the problem of attachment." Vikra's shoulders slumped slightly, a subtle movement that spoke of profound strategic exhaustion. She was being defeated not by a superior force, but by the maddening variables of water temperature, textile blends, and unexplained vanishing socks. She stood back, watching Rohan casually dump the clothes and detergent into the machine. He pressed the normal cycle, and the machine began its violent, churning ritual. "What is the psychological outcome of this ritual?" Vikra asked, her voice quiet, almost reflective. Rohan looked at the spinning drum of the washing machine. "You wait for an hour. You hope nothing gets stained. You pull out clothes that are almost exactly the same as when you put them in, but they smell better. It's a small victory against the entropy of the universe." Vikra nodded slowly, her crimson eyes fixed on the rotating laundry. "I have my finding, Terran Rohan Sharma," she declared. "Your greatest tactical weakness is also your greatest strength. You thrive in the chaos that would paralyze my species. We seek to eliminate risk. You seek to manage risk and find joy in the process. My conclusion remains, you are mediocre, but your mediocrity is a shield." She paused, then added a final devastating observation. "However, you have failed the laundry assessment. Your failure is that you have placed a single red sock into the white's load." Rohan stared at the spinning machine. Deep within the churning white foam, a single rogue red sock was tumbling. "Oh damn it," Rohan muttered. "Precisely. That sock will bleed pigment, contaminating the entire load. Tomorrow your most pristine garments will be tinted a disgraceful pink," Vikra stated with finality. Rohan simply shrugged, accepting his fate. "It happens. We'll rewash them. It's not the end of the world. Just another hour of waiting for a small victory against entropy." Vikra looked at the red sock, then at the man who was completely unbothered by the impending textile disaster. She reached into her tunic, her fingers brushing against the cold plastic of the cosmic fist controller she had pocketed. "We will proceed to the next phase of the assessment," Vikra announced, turning to the door. "We will test the Terran's capability for sustained, focused, intellectual conflict. Be prepared for a demonstration of my improved tactics, Terran. I spent the last cycle running simulations on the Wobble Fist of Destiny input sequence." "You're going to practice on a video game?" Rohan looked genuinely surprised. "The greatest general is one who studies the opponent's illogical strengths," Vikra retorted. "Be ready at 1900 hours, Terran. Bring your own controller." With a final sharp glance at the doomed pink laundry load, the vampire Warbride departed, leaving Rohan to face the predictable yet comforting disaster of his own making. Rohan was waiting at 1900 hours, having salvaged his freshly dyed pink and white laundry from the washing machine. Another small, manageable disaster. He had already set up 2 gaming chairs and prepared a fresh bowl of synthetic cheese snacks, a popular Terran cultural item he knew Vikra would disdain. Vikra arrived, her bearing radiating focused energy. She moved past the snacks without a glance. Her crimson eyes were alight with a calculating intensity far exceeding any actual stakes involved in the activity. "Terran, I have optimized my approach," Vikra announced, taking her seat. She immediately produced the controller she had pocketed. "I ran 784 simulations using a simplified neural network trained on the recorded input from our previous session. The erratic movements you employed, coupled with the randomized input for the Wobble Fist of Destiny, are, in fact, predictable within a 1.4% margin of error." Rohan held up the second controller. "So, you've basically taught an AI how to button mash?" "No. I have created an algorithm for optimal tactical chaos," Vikra corrected, a faint technical pride in her voice. "My plan is 3-phased. Phase 1, the patience block. I will absorb your initial, randomized burst of aggression. Phase 2, the pattern exploitation. I will use the 1.4% error margin to anticipate your special move input lag. Phase 3, the precision counter. I will execute a perfect fireball kick to deplete your health bar." "Sounds like you've overthought a 2-button game, but I respect the effort," Rohan said, smiling. "Let's do this. Best 2 out of 3. For galactic honor. Round 1, the patience block." The pixelated announcer screamed, "Fight." Rohan, reverting to his typical style, immediately launched into a frantic, joyfully illogical string of jumps and punches. Vikra remained perfectly still. Her blue fighter stood its ground, absorbing the light hits. She maintained a stoic posture, her face a mask of supreme concentration, exactly as her Phase 1 plan required. Rohan realized what she was doing. "Oh, you're letting me hit you. That's a risky strategy, General." "Your initial burst is statistically non-lethal," Vikra stated. She was waiting for the one predictable moment of lag that her simulation had flagged. Rohan, instead of attacking, paused. He made his red fighter turn its back to Vikra and started making it jump up and down repeatedly. It was a gesture of pure, unnecessary taunting. Vikra frowned. Her simulation did not account for taunting. It was inefficient. The Terran is wasting energy and clock time. An inexplicable move, Vikra muttered. Rohan then moved, but instead of the predictable punch sequence, he simply walked his fighter across the screen and executed a completely random low headbutt. It did minimal damage, but it broke Vikra's concentration. Vikra's focus wavered for a split second. The tiny delay was enough. Rohan, seeing the chance, immediately unleashed the wobble fist of destiny. KO. Vikra slammed the controller down. The taunt? It violates the fundamental parameters of the game's core objective. It is a psychological distraction which forces the opponent to recalculate the probability of aggression. This is not strategy, it is cheating. "No, Vikra, that's called mental warfare," Rohan corrected, wiping a synth cheese smudge off his finger. "It's about making your opponent angry and off balance. It's what we do." 1-0 my score. Vikra took a deep, steadying breath. Adjusting the algorithm. Incorporating this psychological deterrent factor. Proceed to round 2. Round 2. The adaptive algorithm. This time, Vikra's fingers moved with astonishing, calculated speed. She had adapted. Her blue fighter didn't stand still, it moved with a purpose, countering Rohan's attacks with lightning-fast blocks and perfectly timed minimum energy jabs. She was executing her Phase 2 flawlessly. She was anticipating his spontaneous inputs, predicting the moment his thumb would slip on the directional pad. She was looking for the pattern in his chaos. Rohan was now struggling. The game was no longer fun. It was becoming a genuine strategic duel. Vikra's attacks were relentless, machine-like. Vikra saw it, the exact 3-frame window where Rohan's input lagged after a failed punch. The moment for Phase 3, the precision counter. "I have you, Terran," Vikra declared triumphantly. She executed the complex sequence for the fireball kick. The move connected perfectly. Rohan's health bar dropped almost to 0. Rohan yelled, "No. Wait. My finger slipped." Vikra for a split second paused. Her advanced tactical senses, honed by years of battlefield experience, registered the distress in his voice. She saw his human frailty, the emotional weight of his perceived mistake. In that pause, a delay of less than a single cycle, Rohan, in a last-ditch desperate move, accidentally slammed the wrong button sequence. It wasn't the wobble fist, or the fireball kick. It was a move so rare, so pointless, it had never been catalogued, the shovel fist of friendship. The red fighter performed a strange, slow, sweeping motion that unexpectedly tripped Vikra's fighter. The animation was clumsy, but the effect was devastating. Vikra's fighter, mid-fireball kick, fell on its face. KO. The screen flashed, double flawless victory. Rohan stared at the screen, then at his controller. I don't even know what that move was. That was pure panic." Vikra slowly uncurled her fingers from the controller. She stared at the screen, then at Rohan, her expression unreadable. "The failure was not in the algorithm," Vikra stated, her voice flat. "The failure was the Terran variable. I adapted to your tactical chaos, but I was unprepared for your emotional frailty. The moment you expressed distress, I registered it as a potential exploit, and my system flagged a non-existent threat, causing a decision-making delay." She shook her head, the horns catching the ambient light. "You are not a warrior, Terran. You are a distraction engine. You win not by strategy but by forcing the enemy to pause and question the fundamental nature of reality. Your mediocrity is, in fact, a perfect disguise for this psychological weapon." Vikra stood up. "The assessment must evolve. Intellectual conflict is clearly compromised by your emotional contamination. We will now assess the Terran's capability for sustained, mundane obligation, the true test of civilized life." She looked down at him, her lips curving into a predatory smile that somehow felt less threatening than her confusion. "Tomorrow, Terran Rohan Sharma, we will acquire a pet. An utterly useless, needy, inefficient Terran biological asset. We shall observe if your species' proclaimed capacity for attachment and comfort can survive the grinding daily obligations of caretaking. Rohan, still holding the controller from his accidental victory, grinned. A pet? You want to get a puppy with me, General? That's the most normal thing you've suggested yet. But I warn you, Vikra. That's a long-term commitment. Vikra simply held his gaze. Precisely. And commitment is where all illogical human ventures eventually fail. The next morning, Rohan and Vikra stood outside the Neo Mumbai Animal Rescue and Integration Center, an old, brightly painted structure that smelled strongly of disinfectant and wet fur. Vikra, dressed in a muted, armored diplomatic uniform, surveyed the entrance with a weary expression of a general about to launch a disastrous ground invasion. General Vikra, for the last time, it's not an acquisition of a biological asset, Rohan whispered, adjusting the collar of his, now pink, dress shirt. It's adopting a pet. It's supposed to be heartwarming and emotionally fulfilling. It is a strategic maneuver, Terran, Vikra countered, her gaze sharp. Pets are a liability. They require constant, inefficient resource allocation, food, waste disposal, attention, without providing any tangible defense or tactical benefit. I will observe how your species succumbs to the emotional demands of this parasitic relationship. Parasitic? You sound like my old landlord, Rohan muttered. Inside, the noise level was immediate and overwhelming. Dozens of Terran canines, dogs in a variety of shapes and sizes, barked, whined, and jumped in their enclosures. Vikra's auditory sensors, accustomed to the silence of space and the measured cadence of the command deck, registered the chaos as a violent, disorganized assault. This level of unsorted auditory data is unacceptable, Vikra stated, rubbing her temples. She activated a low-frequency dampening field around her head to filter the noise. Rohan led her past a row of cages. Just try to connect with one. You're looking for a companion, someone who makes you feel slightly less alone. Vikra stopped at a kennel housing a small, fluffy, mixed-breed dog that was currently gnawing on a tennis ball. It was a creature of utter, aimless joy. This one. Subject ID B794, Vikra declared. Low mass, low resource requirements. It presents a minimal caloric drain. Acquisition is recommended. You can't just pick the smallest one, Vikra. You have to spend time with it, Rohan insisted. A moment later they were ushered into a small, sterile visitation room with a volunteer. The small dog, B794, was brought in. It immediately ran in a tight, confusing circle before leaping up and attempting to lick Rohan's face. See? Attachment protocol initiated. Rohan laughed, gently scratching the dog's ears. The dog then turned its attention to Vikra. It paused, sniffing the hard, cold material of her diplomatic suit. Vikra remained utterly still, observing the creature as if it were a bomb. The dog then did the illogical. It did not bark, nor did it retreat. It lifted a small paw and tentatively placed it on Vikra's armored boot, then let out a soft, questioning whimper. Vikra's crimson eyes blinked slowly. Its sensory input indicates a lack of threat. Its vocalization suggests a desire for reassurance. The creature is displaying unwarranted vulnerability. That's called cuddling, Vikra, Rohan explained. It just wants you to pet it. Vikra hesitated. She had commanded armies, crushed rebellions, and outwitted rival generals. She had never been asked to engage in an action with such zero-sum return. Define pet, she ordered. Rohan guided her armored hand down toward the dog's head. It means this. You rub its fur and it sends you positive emotional feedback. Vikra's fingers, used to gripping plasma rifles, were slow and awkward. The moment the cold metal of her gauntlet made contact with the dog's warm, soft fur, B794 sighed contentedly, pressing its head into her hand. Vikra's retinal scanner flashed. Unexpected emotional surge detected. Non-threatening affection. Biological marker. Dopamine spike. The creature is manipulating my neurochemistry, Vikra whispered, utterly fascinated and horrified. Yeah, that's just how dogs work, Rohan smiled. They left the center an hour later, not with B794, but with a medium-sized older golden retriever mix named Captain. Captain had chosen them, not the other way around, by lumbering over to Vikra, resting his huge head on her knee and refusing to move. Vikra found herself staring at the dog's calm, patient eyes. Captain was a creature of quiet, unaggressive loyalty, a concept Vikra knew only in the rigid hierarchy of the battlefield, not in an atmosphere of unconditional love. Captain exhibits low-grade strategic value, Vikra conceded to Rohan on the ride back. Its large mass suggests it could be used as a deterrent against smaller, territorial bioforms. Its loyalty is a measurable asset. He's just a nice dog, Vikra, Rohan corrected, scratching the dog's ear in the back seat. The true test began back at Rohan's apartment. The small space was immediately overwhelmed by Captain's presence. The dog's happy tail knocked a stack of Rohan's antique records to the floor. The bioasset is creating further logistical disorder, Vikra noted, watching the dog sniff every corner of the room. The most crucial assessment came at night. Vikra had insisted on a highly structured schedule, feeding at 0600 and 1800, and waste disposal walks at 0700 and 1900. At 0300 hours, Vikra's internal chronometer registered a disturbance. A whining sound. Captain needed to be let out. Vikra emerged from the small partitioned section of the apartment she had commandeered. She found Rohan already up, pulling on his trousers, his face tired but accepting. The bioasset requires immediate waste disposal protocol initiation, Vikra stated, ready to execute the plan. I will accompany you and maintain perimeter security. No need, Vikra. I got this, Rohan yawned. This is the part of the parasitic relationship, where the human shows up because they made a commitment. It's messy, it's late, and it's illogical. But it's non-negotiable. He clipped the leash onto Captain's collar and walked out the door into the quiet, dark street. Vikra watched the door close. Her mind raced. Why? There was no threat. There was no reward. He was sacrificing sleep, energy, and comfort for a creature that would offer him only slobbery affection. A war general would never tolerate such an inefficient use of resources. She looked at the holographic readout she had been logging. Vikra sat down on the sofa, her posture sinking slightly into the soft, yielding Terran fabric. The logical conclusion was inescapable. Rohan Sharma was not weak. He was resilient. His commitment to the small, mundane, illogical things, pizza, old shirts, and a noisy dog, was the very thing that made him unbreakable. He was not pursuing victory. He was pursuing comfort and connection, and in doing so he was winning the only war that mattered to him. Rohan returned 20 minutes later, looking sleepy but content. Captain padded in, shook the rainwater from his fur all over the newly cleaned floor, and immediately went to sleep on a large, overstuffed cushion. Rohan looked at the Warbride, who was still sitting silently in the dark. See? Commitment. That's the true test. You passed out on me for the whole thing. Vikra looked at him, her crimson eyes holding a look of profound, unsettling realization. I was incorrect, Terran, she said, her voice barely a whisper. The pet is not the liability. The commitment is the weapon. It forces the human to endure sustained illogical misery for an emotional reward. My mission to find your weakness has failed. Instead, I have found the foundation of your species' strength. She stood up, her armor clicking softly. I will file a revised report to the High Command. The Terran species is not weak. It is incomprehensible. The treaty should proceed with extreme caution. As Vikra walked to the door, Rohan knew the assessments were finally over. So, what does this mean for the marriage? Vikra paused, her hand on the cold metal of the doorknob. She slowly turned back, and for the first time, her expression was not one of strategic focus or disdain, but one of genuine, illogical interest. It means that my duty is fulfilled, Terran. The treaty is secure. But I still have a secondary mission, Rohan Sharma, Vikra said, using his first name with a soft, new emphasis. I still need to fully understand the wobble fist of destiny. She held up the blue controller from her pocket. And I have decided that to understand your illogical species, I must immerse myself in your illogical existence. I'm not leaving Rohan. I'm moving in. The Warbride assessment of Terran domesticity is now permanent. The official transition took less than an hour. Vikra did not move in so much as she executed a tactical occupation. Rohan arrived home from his shift at the power grid, still slightly shell-shocked by the Warbride's sudden declaration, to find his apartment subtly but irrevocably altered. Vikra stood in the center of the living room. Gone were the scattered books and charging cables. They had been sorted, tagged, and placed into color-coded, labeled containers stored vertically against the walls. The holographic projector from the Game of Worlds was now bolted onto the coffee table, serving as a command console. I have established a new logistical matrix, Rohan Sharma, Vikra announced without preamble. She now wore a simple, sleeveless black uniform and had a small, efficient utility belt replacing her massive armor. You've sanitized the apartment, Rohan observed, looking around his frighteningly neat home. Where's my old beanbag chair? I need that for optimal gaming posture. It failed structural integrity tests and occupied 1.2 square meters of unnecessary space, Vikra stated. It has been relegated to the discarded assets storage bay, the building's incinerator. Rohan winced. Okay, Protocol 7 Delta is off to a rocky start. Vikra moved to the corner of the room, which was partitioned by a newly erected sound-dampening polymer screen. This area has been designated my private quarters. Its internal atmosphere is regulated to optimize draconian sleep cycles and plasma absorption. Do not enter unless a confirmed threat level exceeds Gamma 3. Plasma absorption? You're using my bedroom? Rohan demanded. No. I am using the area formerly known as your kitchenette, Vikra clarified. The nutritional intake of a Terran requires complex chemical cooking, which is inefficient. I have converted the majority of the space into a low-level energy reservoir for my own sustenance. Rohan stared at the polymer wall. So, no more cooking. No more beanbag. You've turned my home into a sci-fi minimalist prison. I have optimized it for cohabitation efficiency, Vikra corrected, crossing her arms. And I have established the shared asset protocol for the biological unit, Captain. She pointed to a spot near the main entrance. Captain's bed, a large cushion, had been replaced by a small, elevated metal platform. Captain will sleep here, Vikra explained. The elevation prevents ground-level contamination, and the metal is easily sanitized. Furthermore, his feeding schedule is now managed by a sensor-driven dispenser. At that moment, Captain ambled into the room, saw his metal platform, sniffed it once, decided it was hard and cold, and lumbered over to Rohan's feet. He let out a soft, low groan, a clear request for belly rubs. Vikra watched this display of emotional manipulation with icy precision. The bioasset is engaging in comfort-seeking defiance. It is rejecting the optimized sleep environment for the illogical warmth of your contact. Do not reward the defiance, Rohan. Rohan immediately knelt down and scratched Captain behind the ears. Sorry, Vikra, but the Captain is currently executing Terran Protocol Beta 1, the cuddle command. It's non-negotiable. Captain responded by sighing contentedly and resting his head on Rohan's knee. Vikra clenched her jaw. This is the core weakness of your species. The inability to prioritize efficiency over feeling. It's the whole point, Vikra, Rohan countered gently, looking up at her. We don't want to live in a perfectly clean, perfectly efficient world. We want one that feels warm. And if Captain wants to reject the metal bed for my knees, I'm not going to argue with him. The first major confrontation didn't involve an intergalactic threat. It involved a dishwashing machine. Rohan, after a dinner of quick synthetic protein, since the kitchen was now a plasma reservoir, was loading his few plates into the antique dishwasher. Vikra, observing the process, activated her full-spectrum retinal scan. Your loading pattern is highly inefficient, she stated. You are utilizing only 64% of the internal volume, leaving large gaps where the water and detergent distribution will be uneven. This will result in suboptimal cleanliness. It's called stacking, Vikra. It works fine, Rohan said, trying to push a mug into an awkward space. With lightning speed, Vikra's hand shot out. She pulled the half-loaded rack from the machine and, in a silent, fluid display of military precision, she rearranged the entire load in under 30 seconds. Every utensil was slotted perfectly, every plate angled for optimal spray coverage. The internal volume utilization instantly shot up to 99.8%. This is the optimal Terran dishwashing matrix, Vikra announced, her voice filled with victorious finality. Rohan stared at the perfectly packed machine. He felt a sudden, illogical surge of anger, not because she was wrong but because she was perfectly right. You know what? This isn't a battle, Vikra, Rohan said, closing the dishwasher door with a snap. You're trying to turn my life into one of your sterile command decks. This whole arrangement, the lack of kitchen, the sordid cables, the metal dog bed, it's not cohabitation. It's a continuation of your assessment. Vikra met his angry gaze without flinching. It is the establishment of a sustainable environment. Your inherent disorder is a threat to my focus. My disorder is me. And you can't just keep erasing it. You can't vaporize the mess on the first date, you can't win the game by cheating with logic, and you can't turn my home into a minimalist weapon just because it makes you feel safe. Rohan's voice was strained, the first true anger he had shown her. You came here to assess my weakness and now you're here to fix it. But I don't want to be fixed. Vikra looked away for a split second, her crimson eyes flickering, a rare moment of uncertainty washing over her face. She had expected fear or perhaps more laughter. Not this raw, unedited, frustrated humanity. I am simply trying to create an atmosphere of mutual benefit, Vikra insisted, her voice dropping slightly, losing some of its general-like edge. Then stop trying to be the general and start being my wife, Rohan challenged, his voice softening just enough to reveal the painful hope beneath his frustration. We're stuck with each other, Vikra. So, please, leave some room for the stupid, messy things that make me me. And maybe leave the dog bed alone. Vikra looked down at Captain, who was now snoring peacefully at Rohan's feet, utterly disrupting the flow of traffic. After a long, charged silence, Vikra simply nodded, a tiny, almost imperceptible dip of her head. Understood, Rohan Sharma, she finally conceded. I will adjust my cohabitation parameters to allow for a statistically insignificant, yet emotionally necessary, level of Terran disorder. She paused, then added, her voice regaining its technical authority. However, I reserve the right to perform emergency corrective action on any spilled liquids or immediate fire hazards. Rohan smiled, knowing this was the closest he would ever get to a domestic truce. Deal. Now, wanna play another round of Cosmic Fist? I think I finally figured out the shovel fist of friendship. This is the perfect moment to escalate the conflict. The forced proximity of cohabitation has established their dynamic. Now it's time for the political stakes to reappear and force them to act as a unified front. 2 weeks into the cohabitation protocol, a fragile, tense truce had been established in Rohan's apartment. Vikra had conceded the metal dog bed, allowing Captain to sleep on Rohan's worn sofa, though she'd installed a low-frequency sonic cleaner beneath it. Rohan, in turn, allowed Vikra to maintain her plasma kitchenette, but insisted on keeping one small shelf for his archaic coffee maker. Their routine was an absurd blend of Terran normalcy and draconian discipline. Rohan handled the power grid reports while Vikra analyzed combat doctrine. They shared meals, Rohan eating synth protein, Vikra absorbing plasma. And every night, they battled fiercely on Cosmic Fist, with Vikra making steady, calculated gains against Rohan's chaotic luck. The fragile peace shattered with a single, encrypted transmission. Vikra materialized the console on the coffee table. A stern-faced draconian diplomatic observer, Commander Xylo, stared out of the projection. General Vikra, Xylo's voice was crisp and cold. The High Command is receiving alarming reports regarding the integration process. Specifically, your revised assessment of Terran 47BS, mediocrity, has raised flags. The success of the Soul Treaty hinges on this union being politically viable. Vikra stood at attention. My assessment is scientifically sound. The Terran species possesses a deceptive resilience based on illogical emotional investment. The unit is stable. Stability is insufficient, Xylo retorted. Skepticism from the Senate is mounting. We require proof of successful bonding. Tomorrow you and Terran Sharma will host a formal live-streamed marital audit. A Terran diplomatic auditor will assess your compatibility based on shared experiences, mutual affection and the demonstrable presence of love, a high-value Terran emotional marker. Vikra's eyes widened, a flicker of genuine shock in her crimson gaze. Love. That is an unquantifiable, low-probability outcome. I cannot simulate genuine affection in 24 cycles. You are a General Vikra. You simulate enemy weaknesses under fire, Xylo said ruthlessly. You will simulate marital strength for the benefit of the Dominion. Failure will result in your immediate recall and the likely collapse of the treaty. The projection vanished, leaving Vikra staring at the resulting data packet. Rohan, who had been listening from the sofa while scratching Captain's ear, whistled softly. A love audit? That's rough. You need to look like you're emotionally invested in my ability to fix the power grid. Vikra whirled on him, her general persona instantly back. We have 23 cycles, Terran. I require a tactical briefing on the parameters of love and shared affection. What are the key visual signifiers? The next few hours were spent in a whirlwind of awkward preparation. Vikra treated the simulation like a covert infiltration mission. Protocol dictates physical proximity, Vikra said, pointing at a simulation of them sitting side by side on the sofa. Terran females often place their head on the male's shoulder, a gesture of trust and non-aggression. That's called a snuggle, Vikra, Rohan corrected, demonstrating. It has to look natural. When Vikra attempted the gesture, she did so with such stiff, precise military posture that she looked less like a loving partner and more like a statue leaning slightly to the side. You're still too rigid. Relax your spine. You need to look like you want to be there, not like you're waiting for the extraction beacon, Rohan sighed. But my logical desire for comfort is maximized when I am alone, Vikra argued. This is a violation of my personal efficiency. Welcome to marriage, Vikra. It's all about inefficient compromises, Rohan countered. They practiced mutual gazing, Vikra's staring was deemed too predatory, casual touching, Vikra's attempts were precise, localized pressure points, and shared memory recall, Vikra only remembered the pink laundry and the failures of the pizza. Rohan finally surrendered. Look, your logic is too strong. You can't simulate a feeling. Just be yourself but try to remember the stupid, messy stuff we actually did. That's our shared memory, right? The next day, a perfectly harmless-looking Terran diplomat, Auditor Elena Vance, arrived. She was polite, dressed in a sensible suit, and carried a small, innocent-looking notebook. The livestream feed was discreetly set up on the command console. Rohan and Vikra sat side by side on the sofa. Vikra's posture was slightly less rigid, a concession to Rohan's training. Captain lay snoring at their feet, oblivious. General Vikra, Mr. Sharma, thank you for participating, Auditor Vance began, smiling warmly. The goal is simply to confirm the genuine nature of your bond. Tell me, General Vikra, what is your favorite quality in your husband? Vikra spoke first, her voice modulated to sound softer, yet still clinically precise. Rohan's most commendable quality is his resilience to logistical contamination. He accepts suboptimal outcomes, such as the loss of his beanbag chair, with an illogical yet sustained optimism. This level of emotional stability is strategically valuable. Auditor Vance blinked, scribbling a note. Illogical optimism needs follow-up. And Mr. Sharma, what do you cherish most about the general? Rohan looked at Vikra. He saw the general, the assassin, the hyper-efficient tactician. But he also saw the woman who meticulously catalogued every frame of the wobble fist, and compromised on the metal dog bed. I love that she's the most honest person I've ever met, Rohan said sincerely. When Vikra tells me she wants to destroy my species, I know exactly where I stand. And when she tells me my laundry habits are a material sabotage, I know she's right. She doesn't deal in polite lies or messy feelings, just facts. And for an average guy like me, that certainty is actually pretty grounding. Auditor Vance nodded, clearly intrigued. Fascinating. Can you describe a moment when you realized you had successfully connected? A truly shared, personal memory. This was the critical question. Vikra immediately activated her shared memory recall module. She was about to talk about the fireball kick. But Rohan spoke first, a genuine easy smile on his face. It was the other morning actually, Rohan recalled, stroking Captain's fur. We were up at 3 a.m. because the captain needed to go out. It was cold and raining. I was tired, and Vikra was standing there, ready to run perimeter security, still wearing her tactical suit, just to watch me pick up dog waste. She didn't have to do that. It was purely inefficient. He looked directly at Vikra, a small, genuine smile playing on his lips. But she was there. And when I got back, she didn't criticize the wet floor or my inefficiency. She just handed me a warm mug of coffee. That's when I realized this wasn't an assessment anymore. This was just two people dealing with a messy, illogical life together. That's our shared memory, General, the 3 a.m. rain and the dog. Vikra's rigid posture suddenly softened, ever so slightly. She looked at Rohan, then down at Captain, then back to the auditor. Her face was neutral, but her crimson eyes held a depth of emotion that defied all logic. She reached out, and in a spontaneous, unscripted gesture that was completely foreign to her, she placed her hand gently over Rohan's, which was resting on Captain's head. The commitment to sustained inconvenience for the benefit of a low-resource bioasset, Vikra stated, but this time the words felt like affection, not analysis. It is unexpectedly appealing. Auditor Vance closed her notebook, her smile broadening. General Vikra, Mr. Sharma. Your bond is unique. It is not defined by Terran passion, but by a powerful shared commitment to illogical obligations. You have passed the marital audit. The treaty stands secure. As the live feed cut, Vikra snatched her hand back from Rohan's, her cheeks faintly flushed, a subtle chemical reaction she'd never experienced before. That was highly effective, Terran, Vikra breathed, clearly agitated by the unscripted success. But my sensory input indicates that my heart rate and respiratory speed exceeded optimal parameters during the spontaneous gesture phase. This is a tactical vulnerability. Rohan simply squeezed her shoulder, a gesture she now tolerated, but didn't quite return. No, Vikra. That wasn't a vulnerability. That was progress. Now, Commander Xylo is probably going to be pretty mad that you passed. Get ready for the next move. Commander Xylo was furious. The successful marital audit had been an unacceptable outcome, broadcast across both the Terran and Draconian diplomatic networks, making the Warbride mission look like a victory for Terran mediocrity. Xylo, an ultra-traditionalist general, saw Vikra's concession to illogical obligations as a betrayal of Draconian strategic superiority. From the secret Draconian orbital monitoring station, Xylo enacted Sabotage Protocol Gamma-5, a last-resort action designed to create a catastrophic system failure that could be blamed on primitive Terran technology, thus voiding the treaty and recalling Vikra in disgrace. The target, Rohan Sharma's municipal power grid. It was late afternoon. Rohan was in his apartment, working on a complex wiring puzzle, a recreational hobby Vikra had started to observe with grudging interest. Vikra was intensely focused on her command console, trying to beat her own record for the Wobble Fist of Destiny sequence. Captain was asleep on the sofa, occasionally twitching his tail. Suddenly the lights flickered violently and died. The apartment plunged into absolute darkness, broken only by the faint eerie glow of Neo Mumbai's emergency solar lighting far below. Rohan's command console, a relic, went silent. Vikra's advanced holographic console sputtered, then issued a high-priority system alert. The Terran power grid has experienced a catastrophic cascade failure, Vikra stated, her voice sharp with sudden professional urgency. This is not a random event. My systems show a highly complex, targeted digital attack on the main fusion coupling. Draconian signatures detected. Rohan jumped up, adrenaline replacing his earlier calm. A draconian attack? On my grid? That's not a political statement, that's an act of war. People's lives depend on that power. He grabbed his emergency field kit, a bulky Terran tablet and a set of diagnostic cables. I have to get to the central hub. If the dampeners fail, the feedback will fry half the continent. Negative, Rohan. Your priority is survival, Vikra commanded, activating her diplomatic suit's internal armor. This attack is designed to create chaos and expose Terran incompetence. It is a trap. If you appear at the central hub, you will be implicated and eliminated. I will contact the treaty enforcement. And wait for them to decide if my life is worth the paperwork? Rohan demanded, his Terran optimism giving way to fierce resolve. That grid is my illogical obligation, Vikra. I know its flaws, I know its shortcuts. I can fix the coupling before the cascade hits critical mass. I have to go. He ran for the door. Vikra moved faster. Her movements were fluid, instantaneous. She intercepted him, pinning him against the wall with the cold, hard force of her armored arm across his chest. I forbid it, Terran. Your statistical survival rate is below 5%. Vikra hissed, her crimson eyes blazing in the dark. And your mission is to prove my species is too weak to handle a crisis. If I don't go, you win, Xylo wins, and the treaty is worthless. Rohan yelled, pushing back with surprising strength. You asked me for commitment, General. This is it. Vikra looked into his eyes. She saw not the average man she had assessed, but the stubborn, illogical force that had broken her algorithms. She saw the commitment to the chaotic, messy life she had grudgingly started to appreciate. A sudden flash of logic hit her, a logic that transcended draconian duty. If Rohan failed, she would lose her variable, her unique source of confounding stability. She would be recalled and forced back into the sterile, predictable world she now found lacking. Illogical, Vikra murmured, but the word now tasted like compromise. She pushed off the wall. Fine. We go. But this is no longer a political trap. It is a combined tactical infiltration. She grabbed her specialized utility belt. I know the draconian firewall architecture. You know the Terran system routing. We will breach the facility together. If you are going to commit to this illogical self-sacrifice, I will ensure its maximal efficiency. Vikra and Rohan, with Captain, who refused to be left behind, sprinted out into the darkened streets. The city was already descending into low-level panic. They reached the central hub, a brutalist concrete structure now surrounded by confused police drones. My armor can breach the perimeter, Vikra stated. But the data core is protected by both Terran and draconian security measures. I will distract the aerial drones. You find the maintenance access point. No. We go in together, Rohan insisted. My system needs a human touch. Your logic needs my gut feeling. That's how we win. Vikra looked at him, then at the massive concrete wall. She finally nodded. Agreed. Now engage your Terran stealth protocol. That's just called sneaking, Vikra. Follow me. They found a forgotten maintenance tunnel, a place of filth and disorder. Vikra moved through the grime with precise disgust, while Rohan navigated the twisting pipes with the confidence of a man who knew every shortcut in his own home. They reached the control room. Commander Xylo's elegant, targeted virus was tearing through the Terran network. The coupling is at 80% failure, Rohan gasped, running to the main console. I need to reroute the primary load through the gamma manifold, but the system's firewall is blocking my admin codes. The firewall is a draconian-designed logic trap, Vikra stated, her eyes scanning the holographic code pouring over the console. It is designed to exploit complexity. I will insert an illogical bypass, a stream of pure, disorganized Terran data. Rohan looked at her. What kind of data? Vikra hesitated for only a second. She placed her hand on the console and injected the sequence she had been practicing obsessively, the intricate, illogical button-mashing sequence for the Wobble Fist of Destiny. The effect was instantaneous and absurd. The draconian logic trap, Overwhelmed by the random, unpredictable sequence of data, collapsed. The firewall sputtered and died. Now Rohan. The gamma manifold. Vikra ordered. Rohan quickly rerouted the power load. The fusion coupling stabilized. The city lights flickered then came back online. The crisis was averted. As the lights returned, Vikra received a final encrypted message from Commander Xylo. Failure is unacceptable. You are recalled immediately. You have embarrassed the Dominion. Vikra looked at the message, then at Rohan, who was leaning against the console, covered in sweat and grime, triumphant in his exhaustion. She deleted the recall order. Commander Xylo has failed his assessment, Vikra declared. The Terran variable is capable of sustained crisis resolution. I will not be recalled. She turned to Rohan, a tired but fierce look of conviction on her face. The treaty requires a permanent union, Terran. I have observed your resilience, and I now possess the wobble fist of destiny. My mission is complete, but my life is no longer logical. I am staying. Now let us go home. I need a plasma recharge and you need to clean up this disastrous mess you've made. Rohan smiled, utterly exhausted but completely victorious. Sounds like marriage to me, General. The air in the apartment was thick with the residual scent of ozone and triumph. Rohan had secured the central hub and filed a report detailing a highly sophisticated, external, non-Terran attack. A diplomatic understatement Vikra had approved. The city was stable. The treaty held, now backed by the undeniable proof that a draconian general had fought to save Terran infrastructure. Rohan was leaning against the newly optimized kitchen counter, nursing a mug of lukewarm coffee. Vikra had retreated to her partitioned, private quarters, the plasma kitchenette, immediately upon their return. A few minutes later she emerged. She had shed the heavy, damaged tactical armor. She wore only the sleek, black training suit, and for the first time Rohan noticed the subtle scratches and scorch marks on her forearm from the infiltration. Tiny, insignificant injuries a general wouldn't notice, but a husband would. Vikra's posture was stiff and her breath was shallow. She was experiencing an unfamiliar neurological shutdown. My current state is suboptimal, Vikra stated, her voice tight. The rapid shift from high-stakes infiltration to low-level domesticity is causing a sensory overload. My systems are registering fatigue. Rohan gently took the empty mug from her hand. That's called being tired, Vikra. You just saved the city and defied your high command. You're allowed to be tired. No. Fatigue is an inefficiency. It must be countered with immediate resource acquisition, she argued, moving towards the charging port of her kitchenette. Rohan stepped in front of the port. Stop. You don't need plasma right now. You need something else. The Terran counter protocol for extreme stress is called comfort consumption. He led her to the sofa, bypassing the neatly organized cushions. Captain, sensing the exhaustion, lifted his head and gave a low, comforting groan. Rohan sat down and pulled her gently beside him. Vikra sat down, rigid, resisting the illogical softness of the fabric. This is non-strategic. We should be reviewing the threat matrix, she insisted, but she did not pull away. The threat matrix can wait. Look at your hand. Rohan gently lifted her gauntlet. The metal was scraped and dirty from climbing the maintenance tunnel. You've got Terran grime on your general's armor. Vikra stared at the dirt, then at the small scratches on her arm where the armor didn't cover. Minor structural damage. Easily repaired. But you earned it, Rohan whispered. You got your hands dirty for me. For the messy, illogical power grid. He reached for a small, unorganized pile of Terran comfort food he had saved from Vikra's earlier purge. A box of sugary, brightly colored cereal. This is a high-sugar, low-nutrient grain product, Vikra observed, her voice already losing some of its command. It serves no military purpose. It's the best anti-stress medicine we have, Rohan said, pouring a dry handful into his own palm. Try it. It's the taste of illogical pleasure. Vikra hesitated. She analyzed the small, crunchy shapes in his hand, brightly colored, inefficient, and utterly against every rule of draconian sustenance. But her tactical analysis had failed her, and Rohan's illogical methods had won the war. She leaned in and with a delicate, precise motion, she took a single piece of the cereal from his hand. She chewed it slowly. A flicker of surprise crossed her face. Sensory input, sugar high. Illogical taste pleasure, confirmed, she muttered. Rohan laughed, a tired, genuine sound. He put his arm around her shoulders, an unscripted, snuggled gesture she no longer fought. She was still stiff, but she was leaning into his warmth. The next morning, Vikra awoke alone on the sofa. She had fallen asleep in the light of the computer screen, her head resting awkwardly against the armrest. She experienced a moment of intense confusion. This was not her regulated sleep chamber. She looked down. Captain had relocated himself during the night, and his large, warm head was resting squarely on her lap. The dog was snoring happily, his presence radiating pure, uncritical affection. Vikra's logical mind screamed, contamination. The weight was inefficient. She should move. But she didn't. She looked at the dog, then across the room where Rohan was already up, working at his console, sipping his coffee. She felt the residual warmth of the dog and the dull ache of the scratches on her arm, the physical proof of her commitment. When Rohan finally looked over, Vikra spoke, her voice quieter than he'd ever heard it. Rohan, she began. The cohabitation agreement must be formalized. Commander Xylo will not stop at a remote sabotage. He will send an infiltration unit. We must establish an unbreakable defensive perimeter. Rohan nodded, ready for a technical brief. Okay, force field, sonic weaponry? Vikra shook her head. She slowly reached up and unfastened the large, ornate, obsidian draconian crest from the shoulder of her abandoned armor. It was her general's rank marker, a symbol of decades of duty and command. The greatest defense is full immersion, Terran, Vikra stated. She handed him the heavy, cold metal crest. I am submitting my final report. General Vikra is now fully integrated into Terran domesticity. I require an immediate, permanent, irreversible change to my status.
She then pointed to the small, empty finger on her left hand, a finger her species reserved for a ceremonial warpact ring, which signified unbreakable, lifelong commitment. You will acquire a Terran wedding band, Vikra commanded. It is a symbolic marker of illogical, non-transferable possession. It will signify to the Dominion that I am no longer an asset, but a wife. They cannot touch a Terran wife without violating the core terms of the Soul Treaty. She looked him straight in the eye, the sincerity in her crimson gaze terrifying and beautiful. And secondly, I will not be sleeping on this inefficient sofa any longer. It hurts my spine. You will immediately upgrade my sleep environment to the shared Terran mattress protocol. Rohan looked from the heavy general's crest in his hand to the empty finger on her hand. The vampire Warbride wasn't asking for love, or even compromise. She was asking for a permanent, irreversible piece of Terran messiness, a ring, to secure her new, illogical life with him. General Vikra, Rohan whispered, his voice thick with emotion. That's not a compromise. That's a surrender. Vikra frowned, looking down at Captain, whose tail had begun to thump happily against the sofa. No, Rohan, she corrected, with the quiet conviction of a general who had finally understood her enemy. That is a long-term tactical commitment to a life I now find unexpectedly appealing. And you will stop calling me General Vikra. You will call me Vikra. The news of General Vikra's defiance and the subsequent rescue of the Terran power grid by her and her average Terran husband, Rohan Sharma, sent shockwaves through the Galactic Diplomatic Corps. Commander Xylo was recalled and stripped of rank for tactical misjudgment and catastrophic underestimation of the Terran variable. For Rohan and Vikra, life settled into a new, unique rhythm, a state of permanent, contented disorganization. The Draconian High Command, faced with Vikra's final unassailable move, the request for a Terran wedding ring, had been forced to concede. They could recall a general, but touching a Terran wife was a direct, irretrievable violation of the treaty's core premise, non-aggression against Terran domestic assets. Vikra, now officially designated Vikra Sharma, was sitting on the sofa, no longer stiffly, but with a slight, almost lazy slump, Captain's head resting on her thigh. She was no longer wearing the heavy diplomatic suit, opting instead for a tailored Terran leisure outfit that Rohan had acquired for her. She was studying the wedding band Rohan had bought, a simple, matte black titanium ring, practical, durable, and completely illogical. This Terran ring, Vikra mused, turning it on her finger. It provides no defense, grants no rank, and requires constant maintenance to prevent surface degradation. Yet, it renders me politically untouchable. It's the ultimate Terran weapon, Vikra, Rohan said, sitting beside her, looking over his old system logs. A small, useless symbol that means everything. It symbolizes our illogical commitment. Vikra materialized her command console one final time. She was filing her required quarterly report to the Draconian High Command. The previous assessment of Terran 47B is hereby superseded, Vikra dictated, her voice calm and authoritative, but now softened with a layer of domesticity. Rohan Sharma's mediocrity is not a weakness, but a state of optimal non-threatening resilience. His focus on disorganized comfort, emotional attachment, and illogical consumption creates a psychological noise that renders traditional draconian strategic analysis useless. She paused, looking down at Captain and the worn comfort of the sofa. Furthermore, the required permanent union has been achieved. The Terran ritual of marriage is not a political alliance, but a commitment to sustained, messy interdependence. It is a source of unexpected strength. Vikra hesitated before dictating the final line, a small, genuine smile touching her lips. I have also made significant progress in the Terran combat simulation, Cosmic Fist. I can now reliably execute the Wobble Fist of Destiny sequence with 99.4% efficiency. However, Rohan can still defeat me by utilizing the Shovel Fist of Friendship, a move of pure, random panic. Conclusion: the Terran variable remains statistically unpredictable. She terminated the transmission. The High Command would read the report, baffled and frustrated, but ultimately, they could do nothing. The treaty was secured by the very illogical strength they had tried to expose. Later that evening, Rohan and Vikra were sitting on the sofa. Rohan was trying to teach Vikra a Terran concept she found most baffling: relaxation. You have to stop thinking about battle plans, Vikra, Rohan instructed. Just exist. Watch this old Terran show with me. Vikra, however, was focused on something else. She lifted her hand and traced the faint, fading scratches on Rohan's own hand, the hand that had offered her a slice of pizza on their disastrous first date. I have determined the function of the Terran illogical bond, Vikra stated quietly, her crimson eyes holding his gaze. Oh yeah. What is it, General? Rohan asked, leaning into her. Vikra leaned closer, her cool touch brushing his cheek, a gesture of unexpected intimacy that was slowly becoming their norm. It is a vulnerability I allowed myself to acquire, she whispered. A deep, unquantifiable weakness that makes me stronger than my logic ever could. The realization that I would rather face the entire Draconian fleet than endure another night in this chaotic universe without you. She paused, then added, with a return to her typical, deadpan humor, and you will stop leaving the empty synthetic protein wrappers on the command console. It is a violation of the shared space protocol. Rohan laughed, a warm, easy sound that resonated with the comfort of their home. He kissed her gently, a gesture Vikra still found non-strategic, yet increasingly acceptable. Vikra, Rohan murmured. I think we finally got the Terran date right. Vikra leaned her head against his shoulder, finally executing the snuggle without any stiffness. No, Rohan, she corrected, watching Captain roll onto his back, completely unconcerned with galactic politics. Our first date went horribly wrong. She closed her eyes, feeling the gentle, illogical comfort of the man beside her. And that, she concluded, her voice a soft, satisfied purr, was the perfect way for it to begin.